Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from SpaceX's Starbase facilities in southern Texas. My name is Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now, and we are bringing you live special coverage of Starship Flight 6, a joint live stream between Spaceflight Now and LabPadre. So to all of our viewers joining on either live stream, a very special welcome in. I hope you're all having a good start to your week. Of course, Tuesday, November 19th, as we are getting ready to see SpaceX launch the rocket you see here on your screen. Just a little less than 400 feet tall Starship rocket, hoping to repeat some of the successes that we saw just over a month ago with the Flight 5 mission and take it just a bit further with Flight 6. We'll talk about the advances made, the hopes on the table, and all of that with a wonderful suite of guests that we have here. See the countdown clock in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, T-minus 1 hour, 27 minutes, 55 seconds, and counting. We have lots of cameras, lots of angles, and lots to talk about here as we're preparing to see this rocket launch. Of course, SpaceX has been busy these last few days launching 3 Falcon 9 rockets from its 3 launch pads in Florida as well as California, and now turning its attention to southern Texas. As we're getting going, first off, whether you're on the LabPadre stream or the Spaceflight Now stream, you could do us all a huge favor by hitting the like button wherever you're watching and sharing that stream with your friends and family and just casual acquaintances. That's a big help to boost this live coverage and bring it to more folks as we continue on through the countdown. We'll also be looking out for comments and questions from folks in the audience. Assuming your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, we'd love to bring you into the loop. You can use the @ symbol when you enter a question. Just type @ the word question, hit the space bar, and then type in your question, and it should pop into our system. And again, we'll be looking out for those. Also, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature if you'd like to help support what we do here, either at LabPadre or Spaceflight Now, or both. Super Chats are a great way to do so. Not only will it be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on through the countdown today, but you'll be supporting the hardworking folks at both of these channels that make live launch coverage possible, and especially these joint operations, and that is very much appreciated since it takes a lot of time and supplies to make an operation like this work, both with the 24-hour live streaming capabilities and, of course, when we bring it all together for days such as this. We'll also be keeping an eye out for new members that are joining, and we'd love to give you your props as you join in our communities here on YouTube, so we'll keep tabs on that and pop them up as they come available. So we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 25 minutes, 10 seconds and counting to the planned liftoff. Looking at the plan ahead as far as the fueling timeline, which we'll step through in just a second, but the Spaceflight Now, or the SpaceX flight director will nominally make the call on the start of propellant load at about T-minus 1 hour, 15 minutes. And that will begin the fueling process just a little bit after that. In fact, let's go ahead and step through the countdown timeline, let you know the events that we're going to be looking for during this Starship flight in a nominal countdown sequence. And then we'll go ahead and bring in our guests and talk all about the mission that's coming up ahead. As I just mentioned, the launch director will give that go for prop load, T-minus 1 hour, 15 minutes. So we're about 10 minutes away from that point. Then The T minus 49 minute 50-second mark is when the fueling process really gets underway. It starts with the fuel for the ship upper stage, that being liquid methane, starting to flow on board that tank. That's followed by liquid oxygen for the ship upper stage. Fueling on that begins at T minus 49 minutes and 21 seconds. A little less than 10 minutes thereafter, booster fueling begins with that liquid methane, T minus 41 minutes and 15 seconds. A little less than 6 minutes after that, the liquid oxygen starts flowing on the Starship Super Heavy booster. T minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds, the Raptor chill down sequence begins on both the booster and the ship. The liquid oxygen that's flowed to the Raptor engines on both the ship and the Super Heavy booster help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. Moving to the final phase of the countdown, prop load on the ship upper stage wraps up at about T minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Same is true on the booster, about 30 seconds thereafter. T minus 30 seconds is when the SpaceX flight director will verify that they are go for launch. The water deluge system or the flame deflector is activated 10 seconds before T0. The Raptor ignition sequence begins at T minus 3 seconds. And if enough of those Raptors ignite and are healthy, then we'll have a liftoff of the Starship rocket for just its 6th time as a fully stacked vehicle. We hit just after T0. T plus 2 seconds is when we should start to see movement. And as SpaceX likes to say, quote, excitement guaranteed. I teased that we have a couple of guests who are waiting in the wings getting ready to join us here, so let's go ahead and bring them in now. First off, as a part of the LabPadre team, want to welcome in Joel, who's currently down at the Starbase facilities, I believe. Joel, how are you doing?
Not. I'm doing great, and it's great to be here. I'm not currently down there. I was down there about 2 weeks ago or so.
So got a
but
pretty
back.
recent refresh. So, Joel, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
And a familiar voice for folks who've been following spaceflight now for some time and is gracious enough to join us once again for our coverage of the Starship program. He, unfortunately, is also not physically there, but there in spirit is Mr. Stephen Clark, space reporter for Ars Technica. Stephen, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Will. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And I know you're a little bummed as this is the first Starship flight that you were not able to make it down there in person, but thankfully both of you have, a good, thorough experience having been at Starbase quite a few times, so we'll have a lot to talk about as we continue on through the count. And a little bit later on during the countdown process, we'll also be joined by Mr. Zach Golden of the CSI Starbase fame. So look forward to bringing him into the conversation just a little bit later. But Joel, we'll start with you. It's been just a little bit more than a month since we saw Flight 5 of Starship, and the FAA did clear Flight 6 at the same time that it approved Flight 5. I guess we'll start at a high level and then we'll drill in more as we continue on with this conversation. But between then and now, what have been some of the biggest changes, and what are you looking forward to with this flight in particular?
A lot of the changes between Flight 5 and Flight 6 are a lot more subtle than we've seen between all the other launches so far. But they are still interesting. I think one of the biggest ones is some additional adjustments to the heat shield on the Starship upper stage. SpaceX is experimenting more. They have some, experimental tiles in places again, and then they've also removed a large swath along each side, and that is an experiment to see how the vehicle will hold up without tiles along those sides, because those areas are where the chopsticks will need to make contact during an eventual catch. So they need to verify that the vehicle can survive without additional protection in those areas. And then in terms of the flight profile, it is very, very similar to what we saw in Flight 5. The big changes that we're going to see is a faster and harder return for the landing burn for the booster on the catch, and a steeper and higher heating reentry for that ship, really pushing the thermal protection system to its limits, as well as a on-orbit relight of a Raptor engine for the first time.
Yeah, like you said, it's a little bit more subtle on the big flashy parts, but certainly some important changes that have been made along the way, and definitely looking forward to, of course, one of the timeline changes being that we are, of course, seeing a launch at 4 p.m. in the afternoon as opposed to 7 a.m. Central Time, which will allow for a daylight splashdown of the ship upper stage in the Indian Ocean. Taking a look at some B-roll that our photographer here at Spaceflight Now shot for us around Starbase, a little bit of a tour of the ship that's getting ready to launch. Stephen, want to bring you in here as we're looking towards this launch coming up in just about an hour and 17 minutes. Obviously, this is an important repeat for SpaceX in a number of ways, since they've only caught the Super Heavy booster once, and certainly are going to make another go at it again today. I guess from your reporting and just the period in time that we're at right now, for those who may be unaware of, the incoming president is plane circled around Starbase, got an aerial view, and is preparing to watch this alongside Elon Musk. So a lot of political implications potentially for seeing this catch happen for the incoming president, and I wonder how you're thinking of this launch happening at this time in terms of space policy.
Yeah, I think Starship, was already a central piece of American space policy. It's, of course, NASA's choice to be the Artemis lunar lander to carry astronauts to the South Pole of the Moon, beginning potentially with Artemis 3. But I think, given Elon Musk's close relationship and support of President-elect Trump, we'll see Starship potentially become an even bigger fixture with the changes in space policy that we're anticipating with the new administration. I think there's a lot of things under discussion. We'll see who gets selected as the NASA administrator, although I think Elon Musk will have a lot of influence, behind the scenes, no matter who is selected as NASA's new administrator, and in developing space policy and then implementing it. So, right now, NASA's official program of record for Artemis involves the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft to actually get astronauts into space and get them out to the vicinity of the moon and then return them to Earth. But there's been a lot of criticism of that program due to its exceptionally high costs, and we know Elon Musk is no fan of the Space Launch System either. So it'll be interesting to see how Starship fares in the revamped Trump administration space policy.
Certainly something to watch over the next several months and, of course, the years to come during that administration. Sticking with you, Stephen, for a second, you published an article on the run-up to this launch today calling this launch a, quote, turning point for Starship. Folks can head over to Ars Technica to read that for themselves as well, and they certainly should, to keep up with your reporting just in general. But I wonder if you can expound upon the importance of that turning point you were talking about, since obviously this is going to be the last time, as planned, that we'll see this version of a ship upper stage fly.
Right. Well, that's exactly what I was referring to. Is this is the final flight of the Block 1 version of the Starship. So we expect to see the Block 2 debut beginning with Flight 7, in the next couple of months, maybe even sooner. We'll see. But this is kind of if everything goes well on this flight, if they demonstrate the in-space relight of the Raptor engine, if the booster catch goes as well or better than it did on the last flight, if the Starship reentry does as well or better than it did on the last flight, I think a lot of the risks involved with getting Starship into orbit and back will have been retired, and then at that point, it's kind of they're kind of looking at demonstrating applications for Starship instead of just its ability to complete the mission from a transportation perspective. So once this phase of the program is completed, I expect will be a big focus for SpaceX will be the demonstration of the in-space refueling with 2 Starships in orbit, and that, of course, will require the activation of the second launch tower down there at Starbase. So I think that's probably probably still 6 months away from that actually happening at the soonest. But I think another thing that SpaceX is interested in doing is using Starship to launch Starlink satellites to relieve some of the pressure and demand for the Falcon 9 rocket. You can launch many more Starlinks in the Starship, or you can potentially launch the next generation of Starship that is much larger, too large to fit on a Falcon 9 on Starship as well. So I think this flight, if it goes well, is kind of the turning point from a purely experimental phase with Starship into more of beginning to look at applications and operational paradigms.
Yeah, certainly some of those shifts are going to be interesting to watch, especially once SpaceX is ready to start launching the whether they call them proper version 2 of Starlink, or if they end up going with the version 3, the longer or larger versions that can only be launched with Starship. As Gwen Shotwell alluded to, Starship is going to be really the key of SpaceX's business once it's in an operational mode. Just want to note for the time, we are T-minus 1 hour, 12 minutes, 2 seconds and counting. At this point, the SpaceX launch director has made their call for the start of prop load, and SpaceX has posted that they are, quote, go for prop load. So we are moving along, presumably targeting still a good T0 liftoff at the opening of today's window, which again, for folks who may just be joining in either on the LabPadre side or the Spaceflight Now live stream, is coming up at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2200 UTC for those joining around the world. As far as the next fueling milestone that we're looking at here, that'll be coming up at T-minus 49 minutes and 50 seconds when liquid methane begins flowing on board the ship upper stage, and liquid oxygen starts flowing T-minus 49 minutes and 21 seconds. So pretty close to back-to-back. As we are continuing on through the fueling process, about to get underway here on the Starship vehicle, do have some good questions coming in. Again, you can type in the @ symbol followed by the word question, hit the space bar, and then ask your question for whichever live stream you are in, and that should populate into our message portal. Question here from Michael asking, does SpaceX already have a customer for any future iterations of this rocket? Joel, if you want to take that first, and Stephen, if you want to jump in on top to add any additional color.
Yeah, well, their biggest customer is NASA. This is a modified Starship upper stage is going to be used to land astronauts on the moon as part of the Artemis program. We've seen them do some mock-ups with that, but it's been a while. But they do still have some stuff around. They seem to be working, behind the scenes on stuff specifically for that. And then internally, they are definitely a very big customer with the Starlinks, as we've talked about. And Jared Isaacman's Polaris program has plans to use a Starship and be the first human mission on a Starship at some point, undetermined point in the future as well.
Yeah, and Stephen, obviously, in addition to Jared Isaacman and NASA, there have been some other commercial customers that have come and gone for the Starship. Some that are still hanging around, like, for example, Venturi Astrolab, who is one of the 3 companies that's vying for the Lunar Terrain Vehicle contract with NASA. They have pitched that it would make the most sense to fly that on a Starship rocket. Who else have you got your eye on as far as prospective customers for Starship?
Yeah, one thing is the Starlab space station, which is being developed by Voyager Space as one of the options for a next generation commercial space station in low Earth orbit. And Voyager is one of the teams that's working with NASA to kind of develop and build a replacement for the International Space Station after the ISS was retired in 2030. And Voyager earlier this year announced a contract that they're going to launch their entire space station on Starship, which is kind of remarkable to think about. Another thing, I don't think there have been any announcements about this, but one application that I would really be interested in is using Starship to launch space tugs. There's a company called Impulse Space, founded by Tom Mueller, the former SpaceX engineer who helped develop the Merlin engine for the Falcon 9. And Impulse Space is developing a space tug called Helios that is actually designed to ferry large satellites, not just small satellites, but large payloads from a low Earth orbit to geostationary orbit to the moon, other distant orbits, and position them where they need to be for operations. And the Helios system, the Helios tug, is designed to fit inside the payload compartment of a Starship. And in that case, you could use Starship to actually launch the Helios tug into low Earth orbit, and the tug can take the payloads where they need to go. And that eliminates the need or the complication of actually having to refuel the Starship in orbit in order to have the Starship itself carry the payloads to where they need to go. So that is an interesting application, I think, as well, that a lot of customers will be interested in.
Yeah, the sheer potential volume that the Starship can encompass is, I think, really going to offer some creative solutions to potential problems that people are maybe not even thinking of at this point in time. And certainly space tugs are ones that I think have a lot of great applications for that. You just talked about, Stephen. Teased to him just a little bit ago, but we are joined now by our third guest here, T-minus 1 hour, 6 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. Zach Golden with CSI Starbase. Zach, just making sure you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you all pretty well.
Excellent. Good to hear you. And I know this has got to be a fun day for you. You were actually down there at Starbase, I believe. First time you've been able to make it down for a launch since IFT2, if I've got that right.
Actually, yeah, I went down for Flight 5. I wasn't able to make it for this one. So watching from the comfort of my home for once, which is pretty nice. I made it down there for the first 2 flights, and then the following 2 I had to watch from work, and then Flight 5 I was able to actually make it down there to see that one in person. But yeah, this will be the first time I'm actually watching from a comfortable position at home.
And so for those who may be unfamiliar with CSI Starbase, your channel really focuses on really getting into the fine nitty-gritty of changes down at Starbase, things that have been upgraded, altered, possible solutions to issues that people may not be paying as close attention to with the inner workings of the hardware with the rocket, the hardware with the tower. For you and your folks, what are you most watching with this mission to see how well it executes from what has been promised to what we may see here coming up today?
I think the change in flight profile is one thing I'm really excited for today. I think one thing that kind of surprised me a little bit during Flight 5 was the way that the booster had to kind of like jog sideways to reach the tower. Was kind of expecting a little bit more of a direct approach instead of one that looked like it was potentially going to bail from the attempt. So one thing that we've seen posted by Elon was that they were planning a more aggressive approach for the booster. Um, I think they said it was going to be a harder landing. Um, and we're also expecting to see a similar thing for the ship as far as coming in with a higher velocity, I believe. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see the way that the booster and ship perform with these changes. I think a lot of this is kind of testing for different mission parameters that may happen in the future, but also, kind of really optimizing the flight profile as well. So I think the last flight was a little bit more conservative, and this one will be a little bit more aggressive.
And just looking at the fueling timeline as posted by SpaceX for this mission versus Flight 5, versus Flight 5 and some of the others that preceded it, it seems like they're still also working and fine-tuning the exact timing of, when they start prop load on ship versus the booster and exactly when during the countdown that happens. Some things seem to be locked in, others are a little bit more fluid at this point. When do you expect there to be maybe a little bit more solidification of the fueling timeline? And, what do you think that tells us about the changes that we continue to see on that end of things?
Well, they've made a lot of changes to the orbital tank farm over the past few flights. I believe ever since flight one, really, they've been making changes to that tank farm. And as you all can see now, the vertical tanks are gone. I think last flight was the first time that they were all removed for. But, even though it seems like most of that work is done, there's still a lot more happening on the ground as far as within that orbital tank farm. So pretty much in between every flight, they're still continuing to add new components. And this time around, I think most of their focus was with components that will be related to Pad B. So I'm actually a bit surprised that there would be any kind of change to the process. I think it's just kind of, tweaking the procedure a little bit. But I don't know. I think we won't really see any real pattern, a permanent pattern, until they move over to Pad B. Until then, I think we'll still continue to see changes, significant changes to the launch procedure.
Yeah, it certainly we'll continue to watch and look for Flight 7, which will feature, as we talked about earlier, the first Block 2 version of the ship upper stage, if there are any additional notable tweaks to that. Currently T-minus 1 hour, 1 minute, 10 seconds and counting. Do want to shout out Chuck and Jen Briggs, who are also down there at Starbase, having made the trek from Florida, taking a live look at their camera view here right now. Appreciate them making the journey. Want to go to another question that came in from Bat Dude, and I'll start with Steven this time, asking any ideas from you guys about when Starship might attempt a land-based landing. Of course, for those unfamiliar, this time, as with Flight 5, the ship upper stage will perform a soft water landing in the waters of the Indian Ocean, sort of to simulate what a catch environment might look like. And they're launching today at 4 p.m. Central in order to get a daylight landing and have some marine assets that are currently staged out there. Stephen, I believe there's been some words from SpaceX officials about this, that we're looking at, early to mid 2025 potentially, maybe a little bit sooner for catch attempt. But what is your reporting telling you right now as far as that goes?
Yeah, that's also what I'm hearing, Will. I think it's probably still a couple of flights away, although you never know with Elon Musk. He moved forward the Super Heavy booster catch from what was originally going to be the first attempt on Flight 6, this flight, to Flight 5. So, we'll see if that happens. But I think it's still going to be a couple of flights away, because I think SpaceX is probably going to want to complete a full flight with Starship Block 2 into, into the Indian Ocean or a controlled water splashdown somewhere else in the open sea before they bring it back to Starbase for a catch. So, I think it's probably still, I don't know, 4 to 6 months away if I had to guess. Could be a little sooner, could be a little later. Certainly think they're on a trajectory to do it next year. One thing that I have been thinking about is the regulatory approval process for that. Of course, that issue may be put on the back burner, may not be as serious of an issue given the incoming Trump administration and Elon's influence in that administration. But when Starship comes in for a catch, for a reentry, it's going to be flying over populated areas. So it's going to be flying over much of Mexico, including almost directly over the city of Monterrey, Mexico, which is a very large metropolitan area with a couple million people in it, and then also over the Brownsville area on the U.S. side of the border. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any overflight concern with that. Of course, the space shuttle regularly re-entered overpopulated areas, and that was in a large part not ever a safety issue. Of course, the one exception was the breakup of the shuttle Columbia over Texas, which spread a lot of debris over, a lightly populated area, but certainly areas where people live. And it's no one was injured in that, but there were cases where, if someone had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, they could have been hit by some of that debris. So the safety analysis and the regulatory approval for that will be something to watch as well. Of course, that's something I think that the government needs to take seriously, but given the streamlined regulations and more light touch that we expect from the new administration, it may not be that significant of a delay.
Yeah, and our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, just reminded me a lot of the early shuttle missions did come in over with a landing in California, so obviously they may take a more cautious approach with these early landing catch attempts, whatever that may look like, whether it's not a full orbit around the Earth with a splashdown maybe in the Pacific Ocean, closer to what they were advertising with some of the initial launches of Starship, as opposed to the Indian Ocean splashdown that we've seen as of late. Currently T-minus 56 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. At this point, we are now less than 10 minutes away from the start of fueling beginning. For those just popping into our live stream here, you're watching joint live coverage of Starship Flight 6. Seeing some good venting there at the orbital launch tower as fueling is getting ready to begin, which will start with liquid methane on the ship upper stage at T-minus 49 minutes, 50 seconds. Joel, want to bring you into the conversation again as we're, seeing a pretty sizable venting here. If you want to just talk about, and explain to the viewers, the purpose of this vent and what it signifies at this stage in the countdown.
Yeah, so we see two big vents. We see one up about the middle of the tower, and then one coming right on the launch mount, right underneath the booster quick disconnect. So what's happening here is after they pulled go for propellant load operations, they began using liquid nitrogen to cool down all the pipes between the holding tanks and the vehicles. Those need to be cooled down to minimize boil off during actual propellant loading. And so they have vents shortly before the actual connections to the vehicles, and they run liquid nitrogen into the lines, and that starts boiling off as it cools down the pipes and vents out. So once we move into actual propellant loading on the vehicles, we should see both of these vents stop, and then they will start up again at the end of propellant load as SpaceX vents off and clears the lines ahead of launch.
Yeah, for those familiar with Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy launches, we see a similar but singular big vent that comes up about the T-minus 20-minute, 20-second mark for Falcon 9 launches both here and at Vandenberg in California. So similar concept, obviously different style with the launch tower there at Starbase. Seeing a little bit of the ground infrastructure here. Zach, if you want to jump in here, you talk a little bit about some of the changes of the orbital tank farm. Obviously exceedingly different from the first couple of Starship launches. Everything is, or just about everything is moved to a horizontal model. If you want to talk about the reason why that is and some of the benefits that have been offered to SpaceX from this change.
Yeah, definitely. So, as most of you all will remember, the vertical tank farm was primarily mostly in use for the first two launches, and they definitely sustained a lot of damage during those launches, especially after the first one. They initially they have a berm that was in place to kind of direct the exhaust plume over the tank farm, but I don't think it really did its job very well and still allowed the plume to basically go straight through the tank farm. So they weren't very well protected structures. They were kind of nice just because they were such large tanks and allowed you to store such a massive amount in a single container. But overall, I think they realized that they were just having too many issues with it, and it made a lot more sense for them to switch over to a manufactured tanks that were basically designed for this instead of going with a homemade storage system. So now all of their tanks are horizontal hot dog tanks. They've added they're adding additional tanks as well too. We're still waiting on, I think, two large tanks to show up probably after this launch at some point. They do have the foundations prepared for it. And in general, most of what they're doing right now also has to do with preparing for that second launch site, like I said. So needing to be able to perform the same operations on both pads. The biggest of those, I think, is detanking. So we don't know if they're going to use the same pumps for loading propellant all the way across over to that other pad. But the other challenge, like I said, is with detanking the booster and the ship. You need different equipment set up in order to do that between the two pads. So I think they're actually going to duplicate that system, whereas other systems will actually be shared. So I think that's one of the things they're currently working on right now. Beyond that, their pressure building system for the actual propellant tanks has been changed a little bit. It's a little bit difficult to describe without being able to show some of the components involved in that. But it's mostly centered around some water tanks that they have in the middle of the tank farm. But I think their efficiency has gone up quite a bit. They've been able to speed up the propellant loading process by adding in additional pumps, which was after flight 3, I believe. They've been able to get that prop loading time down even further since then. So tons of improvements in efficiency since the early flights.
Absolutely. And as we are now T-minus 50 minutes 36 seconds and counting, we're less than a minute from the beginning of that fueling getting underway. So we'll look for the tapering of the vent that we've been talking about here at the orbital launch tower, nicknamed Mechazilla, of course. Stephen, I'll pose this question to you coming in from the Rocket Girl through the Spaceflight Now side of the stream, asking, question, since the trajectory is east, will I be able to see the launch from Houston? And since you've got some experience seeing activity from a little bit north of Starbase, I'll throw that to you and also tease out that up on the International Space Station, one of NASA's best astronaut photographers, Don Pettit, will apparently attempt to capture the launch of Starship if the visibility is good enough from the space station. So his son has posted a message about that. But Stephen, if you want to take the trajectory and the visibility question here.
Yeah, thanks for forwarding that to me. I think seeing it from Houston for this launch is probably unlikely, although I wouldn't discount it or eliminate any chance of seeing it entirely because, as we know, people see these launches from hundreds of miles away, especially as they climb higher and get over the horizon. So, but given the time of day, 4 p.m. Central Time, it's daylight. Of course, the weather here in Texas is quite good, so the visibility should be no problem. But I think you'd have a much higher chance of seeing this launch if it was closer to twilight, at dawn or shortly after sunset, as you get that jellyfish effect as the rocket climbs higher in the sky. That would be, easily visible from Houston. But I think, given the time of day, it's probably going to be difficult. If you are able to see anything, it may just be a dot, on the horizon, with, maybe a faint plume. But if you have clear skies and you have the time and a clear visibility off to the south or southwest, it's worth a try, certainly, as it will climb above the horizon from Houston because there is a ground station, a tracking site in Houston that SpaceX uses to actually receive signals and telemetry from Starship. So it will be above the horizon. It's just a question of will the atmospheric dynamics and environment allow you to see it.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt here. It
No,
seems
please.
like we may potentially have propellant loading beginning on the ship.
Yes. Based off the timeline, certainly we're at that point. Both methane and LOX should be loading on board the ship upper stage now at this point. So, Zach, since you happen to jump in, what are we looking for here? What should folks be watching as tanking now gets underway?
Well, one of the big signifiers, I guess, is the venting coming from the middle of the tank farm. They're kind of vents that are shooting up in a bit of a V pattern. So that was kind of the first indication right there, but also seeing those lines going into the ship QD are a bit frosty right now as well too. So yeah, we should start seeing the frost line build up on the ship here soon. I don't think they've started on the booster yet. The launch mount is still venting currently, so as soon as that stops, we could probably assume that they've started on the booster.
Yeah, we'll certainly keep a visual eye out for that. For folks that are watching the clock, that should start at about T-minus 41 minutes and 15 seconds for booster liquid methane loading, and then the LOX starts flowing T-minus 35 minutes, 39 seconds. So at this point in time, things are continuing on track for a good planned launch at the beginning of the window here of Starship Flight 6. Of course, if past is protocol, they do have an option once they get down to the T-minus 40-second mark to hold for Joel or Zach, can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe they have the ability to hold for 25 minutes if they hit the T-minus 40-second mark and then need to hold off on launching if they need to clear out a boat in the keep-out zone or something like that.
I wanted to say 20, but you might be right. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly. But yeah, they can hold for a period at that T-minus 40-second mark, which is a nice safety check to have. But, one of the really remarkable things I think that we've seen out of these last flights is how well these countdowns seem to go for an experimental rocket. SpaceX, you can really see their experience, I think, with these test flights, that what they've learned from the hundreds of Falcon 9s that they've launched, and they've really got their systems down. They know what to look for in these countdowns, and have really been putting on a show with how well they do it.
And Joel, I'll stick with you since we've got another question coming in here from Rick Donner, who asks, do we know how many engines will be involved in the relight demo? I believe the answer to that is 1, but if you can confirm that and explain why they would only relight 1 as opposed to the 3 vacuum engines.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And you want to relight a sea level when you're doing anything, just because they're the ones that gimbal, so they give you control. Um, but really, the purpose of this isn't any real course changes or any real Delta V changes. The purpose is just to prove that they can relight these in vacuum. It's something that hasn't been done yet, and it's a big thing on their checklist, I think, because I think this is a big reason. They've had issues with the Starlink dispenser and stuff, and but I think really to get operational and go to orbit rather than these suborbital flights we're seeing, they need to prove that they can relight in space to prove that once they get to orbit on a future flight, they will be able to safely get back out of that orbit. Because as we know, Starship is got a heat shield on one side, and it is incredibly large. And if it were to go up into orbit and not be able to deorbit, then at some point in the future, it poses a pretty significant threat, given its size and its thermal protection. It is not the kind of thing that you want to have an uncontrolled reentry on.
And Stephen, bringing you back into the conversation here, obviously NASA is also very, very eager to see the relight of an engine on the ship upper stage, since obviously as the human landing system for both Artemis missions 3 and 4, having it be able to propulsively land on the moon and then lift off the moon's surface, and for Artemis 3 dock with the Orion spacecraft and then subsequently the Gateway space station, proving the relight capability at this stage in flight is going to be key to the beginning of those building blocks, right?
That's right, Will, and it's also a prerequisite to going into orbit, as has been said before. So that means they need to demonstrate the relight capability before they can actually accomplish the in-space refueling demonstration. So that's one of the requirements to get into that phase of demonstrations next year, is to get the Starship into low Earth orbit. And before you can do that, you need to demonstrate the relight capability.
Now currently T-minus 41 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. At this point, the booster fuel loading should be just now getting underway. Based off of the venting we're seeing here, Zach, is that lining up with what we're seeing visually from this camera view?
It doesn't appear that it's started yet. We still have the launch mount venting right now, so I don't believe that it's started yet. They may potentially start methane before. However, it's difficult to tell until you see the frost line with that. But as of right now, still no prop loading on the booster.
Well, actually, as you were talking, I should have jumped in as about 40 seconds into your comments there. SpaceX did tweet that prop load of the booster is actually just now underway. So we are getting in business there with the Super Heavy booster with a liquid methane, and LOX should follow shortly thereafter at about T-minus 35 minutes and 39 seconds. Taking a look back at our question block here. And again, for folks that may just be joining in here with our special live coverage between LabPadre and Spaceflight Now, welcome in. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. We're glad to have you with us. At this point in time, fueling on the Super Heavy booster has just begun. We are awaiting liquid oxygen load on the booster B13, but fueling on ship upper stage with both liquid methane and liquid oxygen has been going for several minutes now at this point. Taking a look at our question portal, and for those who want to ask a question, you can just type the @ symbol, the word question, hit the space bar, and then type out your question. This one coming from Jason asking, how does the payload capacity of Starship compare to that of the space shuttle? And Steven, since you've done quite extensive reporting over many years about the space shuttle program, want to toss that over to you, how the two stack up, since, obviously there are some key differences on capacity.
Right. Well, so the space shuttle had a capacity for payload mass to low Earth orbit of about 50,000 pounds or so. So that's 22, 23 metric tons, if I'm doing my math right in my head here. So Starship, especially when they get to Block 3, when they're able to get that full capability, full capacity of 150, even 200 metric tons to low Earth orbit. So that will be, roughly, just shy of 10 times the capability of the space shuttle. So a significant increase in payload capacity compared to the shuttle. And that's what Starship will offer. Of course, version 1 that we're currently seeing, I think Elon said earlier in the year that it's, the current version of Starship we're seeing is only quote unquote capable of about 40 to 50 metric tons to low Earth orbit. But that will be improved with Block 2, and then with Block 3, I think, is when SpaceX hopes to see the full advertised capability of Starship available.
And certainly there are, I'm sure, a lot of both investors into the Starship program and SpaceX writ large, as well as customers, whether they be commercial or research institutions that are eager to see that increased capacity once Starship is able to get to that version 3, especially start really maximizing its capabilities. Taking a close-up look here at the ship upper stage, starting to see that frost line begin to build as both the LOX and the liquid methane start to stack up and fuel this rocket, as we're now T-minus 36 minutes, 47 seconds into counting. And we are just a little less than about a minute away actually now from the start of booster LOX load.
It looks like it may have actually started just a few moments ago. The venting on the launch mount has finally stopped.
All good observations, gentlemen. Appreciate that. Joel, just as we're seeing this view of the Starship stack and against a beautiful Texas sky here, I want to talk about the visibility, not so much on this end of the mission, but on the back end once ship splashes down in the Indian Ocean. And if you want to expound upon the importance of SpaceX pivoting to an afternoon launch from here to get a daylight splashdown of the ship upper stage, why that's so important at this stage in the program's development for them to not only get the data from Starship, but get as good of visual records as they can.
Yeah, one thing that we heard SpaceX talk about during Flight 5 was that they were really hoping with their accurate landing that they were going to be able to get some footage of that heat shield before the ship fell over into the ocean. And they didn't really, I think, get the shots that they wanted. But having it in daylight, and provided that the accuracy is the same, having those buoys there with cameras able to track the ship for much longer rather than just seeing it during the landing burn, they should be able to get much better footage of the condition that the heat shield is in as it's coming down. And really kind of this launch window, I think, should kind of give them the best of both worlds, because they're coming down shortly after sunrise, I believe, in the Indian Ocean, which means that the initial atmospheric reentry and heating should still be pretty dark, which is kind of ideal for seeing that plasma build up around the heat shield. But then as they get lower, they'll move into daylight, and really the cameras will be a lot more functional for them.
Absolutely, and just want to go ahead at this point, bring in for a moment some really nice drone images that we were seeing from SpaceX, and we'll check in periodically with the SpaceX feed as countdown progresses. Now T-minus 33 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. At this point in the countdown, all 4 tanks on both stages of the Starship rocket are now fueling. As we take a close look here at the base of the Super Heavy booster, you can see the liquid oxygen now flowing on board B-13. We got back to that drone video here from SpaceX. Some really excellent shots of Starbase here. A nice vantage point of the second tower, which of course will play a big role in SpaceX's plans to have an on-orbit fueling depot that'll enable missions not only to the moon, but eventually onto Mars as well. Just want to point out very quickly, for a little bit of housekeeping, you'll notice our countdown clock at the top of the screen, a little bit different than what you're seeing on the SpaceX feed. The clock in the biggest part of the screen at the top there, that is in real time, and what you're seeing from the SpaceX feed coming in on a slight delay. So as the mission progresses, we'll be making our initial callouts based off of real time, as those will line up with our cameras there on the ground at Starbase, and then we'll pivot to the SpaceX feed and their clock once we get a little further in the mission. Let's go ahead and listen into SpaceX's Dan Hewitt for just a second here as he's giving an update.
At about T-minus 49 minutes, and then the booster followed just a couple minutes after at about T-minus 41. We're almost halfway full on ship, just about a third on booster. Those are both going to continue until we're about 3 minutes, 20 seconds before liftoff on ship. And then the booster is going to close out at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So we pretty much are reloading up right to that last possible minute, keeping it as dense and cold as possible, and then getting off the launch pad. The countdown startup sequence, everything will look very familiar if you watched Flight 5, assuming you did. But you're going to see the engines start to ignite at about 3 seconds before liftoff. They're going to start up in 3 different groups. First, those center 13, then 15 of that outer ring, and then those final 5, bringing all 33 Raptors online. After that, we'll see about a second later, and then it'll lift off, so a couple seconds from first light until motion. As usual, we can hold at T-minus 40 seconds if we have any last-minute issues to clear, anything with the range, anything that triggers on the vehicle. And if we pass T-minus 10 seconds, the deflector fires, and then we scrub, then we're done for the day for at least 24 hours. But weather is fantastic, light breeze, no clouds in the sky. Not tracking any hardware constraints to launch today. If we're not able to get off the pad, though, we've got opportunities throughout the week. Could be 24 to 48 hours later. But everything looking great. I'm excited to be able to see another one of these get off the pad. Check back in with everybody in just a couple of minutes. Back over to Jesse and Kate.
And a good update there from Dan. As, of course, we are busily watching this upcoming launch preparation for the Starship vehicle. Of course, the Never seems to give us a rest, does it, Stephen? Want to go ahead and bring you back in here. Stand by 1 second. Sorry, just listening to some background conversations here, just making sure I'm not missing anything. Steve, I want to go ahead and bring you in here as we're getting ready to see this Starship launch. We do have some moon-related news as it pertains to potentially SpaceX and or Blue Origin. If you want to go ahead and talk about the new plans that NASA just rolled out.
Sure thing, Will. Yeah, NASA just put out a release less than an hour ago now, talking about their plans to award some new contracts to SpaceX and Blue Origin to deliver large cargo elements to the lunar surface with their human-rated lunar landers. So we knew this was in the works. I think last year NASA put out a notice that they, plan to award cargo contracts to these two companies, but we've seen those plans come into a little more granular detail with today's announcement. So we expect, NASA expects to award a contract to SpaceX to deliver the Japanese-built pressurized rover to the lunar surface no earlier than fiscal year 2032 in support of the Artemis 7 mission and then subsequent Artemis missions. And then NASA expects to award Blue Origin and their Blue Moon human-rated lander to do an uncrewed mission to deliver a lunar surface habitat to the moon no earlier than fiscal year 2033. So just at the start of our broadcast, you mentioned we talked about the possibility of SpaceX getting a larger role in Artemis. Of course, this announcement today is one example of that, and I expect to see more of these, especially as the Trump administration takes a look at the space policy and the architecture and plans for the Artemis program. But of course, this announcement today, predates the election. This was already in the works beginning last year.
Yeah, and just for our viewers, note the images that we popped up on the left-hand side of the screen, the main part of the picture here. You're seeing the cargo variants of both what Stephen was just talking about, the Starship lander that'll be used in the HLS cargo version, and then, of course, Blue Origin's Blue Moon cargo variant of its lander. And the vehicle that you see coming out of the two, I believe, is the aforementioned pressurized rover that JAXA is creating through Toyota as the prime contractor there. Of course, obviously well known for their terrestrial vehicles, now working on a pressurized rover for the moon. Right. Well, thanks for putting these up. I think that's a good illustration of the size differences between Starship and the Blue Moon lander. Of course, Blue Moon is a large vehicle in and of itself. But it is significantly smaller than Starship. I think the Blue Moon lander, just looking it up, the height of the Blue Moon lander is about 16 meters or 52 feet tall. And so that's about, about a quarter of the height of Starship. But still significantly larger than the Apollo lunar module that landed the astronauts on the moon in the Apollo program. So one thing I think it's worth noting is the pressurized rover obviously comes from Japan, and as the Trump administration, we expect it to take another look at the architecture and plans for the Artemis program. But one thing it might be difficult to unwind, and may not be popular to unwind, is some of the international agreements that the Artemis program has found over the past few years, like the Artemis Accords, for example, is one thing. And then also these contributions from Japan, from the European Space Agency, from Canada, and from even new emerging spacefaring nations like the United Arab Emirates and India. All these, the way the Artemis program is set up, it includes these contributions from international partners.
And of course, that's a kind of a counterweight to China's plans to land on the moon in partnership with Russia. So as the Trump administration looks at the Artemis program, I think there will be a lot of interest in trying to keep those international partnerships part of it.
Absolutely. Obviously, the international nature of Artemis is something that is really important for NASA to continue to cultivate. And in just a second here, I'm going to play a little bit of tape from an interview that we did prior to this launch with NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik, who is the assistant to the chief of the astronaut office, in which we talked about some of the developments for the astronaut office and the role that they're playing in the Artemis architecture, giving their advice and recommendations to some of the commercial partners like Axiom Space and like SpaceX in the development of their hardware in ways that will best be able to integrate with the humans that'll be living and working on it. Go ahead and bring that in whenever it's ready. For now, we're T-minus 23 minutes, 14 seconds, and counting with this timeline here. Appreciate all of you who are joining with us live, whether on the Spaceflight Now or the LabPadre live streams. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor and just hit the like button. It's a free and quick way to support what we do here at Spaceflight Now and LabPadre and help bring this joint live stream coverage to more eyeballs. We're coming up on the next milestone here in the fueling process, which is the Raptor chill on the booster and ship. Before we go ahead and get to that point, let's go ahead and listen into part of our conversation with Mr. Randy Bresnik, during which we talk about what it's like on the inside of the HLS version of Starship.
You know, the biggest thing to note with Starship, you know, having been in other spacecraft, is how big it is. You know, that is just such a unusual thing for us for a dynamic spacecraft. You know, space station is, you know, the size of, they say, like a 5-bedroom house on the interior volume, and but to have, you know, go from an Orion or a Soyuz, like I flew, or a shuttle, and just go into the expanse of the flight deck of Starship is just amazing. Where you've got a you know, part of it where it's a, you know, the flight deck where the seats are, where the controls and displays are, and then you've got on the same floor, you've got the habitation areas, the hygiene areas, and then you go down into another deck below to where you then have access to the airlocks, which then go to what they call the garage, with the garage being the part that's exposed to vacuum, where you end up would exit the airlocks in your spacesuits to be able to hop on the elevator to then go down to the lunar surface. And so, you know, obviously very new concepts to where you have such a large lander that is as tall as it is, and that we've got to take an elevator down to the surface to get past all the levels of the tanks and the engines and everything that are below the crew compartment. You know, VR has been helpful in these past several years as they, you know, before they've gotten full-size mock-ups available. It's pretty neat to, you know, do VR when you're looking at the design of the airlock and where to put the hatch, what size is the hatch, and to get into the garage area of where the elevator is. And I remember being struck a couple of years ago where in the VR, you know, you come out of that airlock and you're kind of in a enclosed area, and then that garage door is open where the elevator goes out, and you would actually go on the surface, and you could go out there in the VR, and then from, you know, 30-ish meters up above the lunar surface, look out at the expanse of the lunar surface, you know, with the graphics they have, and you get a glimpse of what it will be like for those first humans to see the surface, not just from, you know, the surface itself, but to see how this visual expanse before they go down to the surface to go explore. It's going to be amazing.
And our thanks again to Randy Bresnik with the astronaut office, and for the folks at the Johnson Space Center for connecting us and talking a little bit more about that. Now T-minus 19 minutes, 50 seconds. At this point, the engine chill on both booster and ship should be just about coming up right now. Zach, bringing you back in here, obviously the chill down of the engine's a very important part of thermally conditioning the rocket in both stages prior to this mission getting underway. But if you want to expound upon that and maybe some of the lessons learned from previous flights as far as the engines are concerned with this whole venture.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been probably, at least the way that they're doing it right now, kind of standard through the first 6 flights. You can see the engine chill venting going on the ship currently. It's actually coming out just below the grid fins on the booster. So there's actually like a little pipe that connects from the vent on the ship and also passes through the hot stage ring, or not through the hot stage ring, but outside of the hot stage ring and then below those grid fins. The booster does the same thing. It actually collects directly from the side of the engines, or sorry, actually on a panel around the rim of the engine skirt. So all of that gets dumped into a pond, which it doesn't appear has started yet. Usually you can see it to the, or just below the tower from that view that we were just looking at. But yeah, I mean, thermal conditioning is definitely important. They also do it on the methane side, which is something that we saw during the actual landing attempt last time. So as long as they're planning to restart an engine, as long as it's not running, they have to basically cycle methane and liquid oxygen through those engines in order to keep them conditioned. And so that's something that you'll see when the booster comes in from landing, is basically that the methane vent from the front of the booster QD, and as it's falling into its own exhaust plume, that'll be ignited by those flames. So I think a lot of people weren't expecting to see that during landing and kind of thought it was maybe some sort of issue, but it's fully expected and just part of that process for the center engines that aren't running.
And speaking of things that maybe folks aren't expecting, Joel, for those who were not present for Flight 5 and maybe this is their first time seeing Starship in person, or if they just happen to be in the Rio Grande Valley area and not really paying attention to this at all, they may experience quite a bit of noise in just a little bit when the Super Heavy booster comes back in for the planned catch with the sonic boom. Can you kind of give a little bit of an overview of what the sonic boom is and, the impact of that is, from Flight 5, you saw some local news reports that it could be heard from about 90 miles away.
Yeah, as the booster comes back in and it crosses over the sonic speed of sound, as we've seen through the history of spaceflight, that creates a sonic boom, a pressure wave there that goes out ahead of it, and given the that the sound of that is related to the size of the vehicle, and given how big these boosters are, it creates a very loud sonic boom. Not enough to do any damage. A lot of people were worried, and I think a lot of the spectators last time were surprised by just how loud it was. And the other thing to keep in mind is that it's actually two sonic booms in quick succession, because you get one as the engine section passes through the sound barrier, and then immediately followed by another one when the slightly wider grid fins pass through that. And so you'll get a kind of a double clap.
Yeah, certainly for those who've watched Falcon 9 rockets here in Florida or out in California with a return to landing site or RTLS landing as opposed to a drone ship landing, we've all more or less gotten used to it when it happens, but still quite a new sensation for those in southern Texas or close to the border there in Mexico as well. Now, T-minus 14 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. So far, things progressing well with the fueling process. Want to throw this question to you, Zach. This coming in from Kevin Morgan, asking, what is the long-term goal at Starbase compared to the Cape, not only for Starship, but all rockets? Obviously, we've got one launch tower that is in operation here, getting ready to support Flight 6 of Starship, and Tower 2 coming online in the fairly near future, but we want to expand that out to what is the broad long-term goals for Starbase as we know them?
Well, Starbase was initially expected to just be the R&D facility, and to some degree that is still the case, but with the delays that they've had with getting Starship up and going at the Cape, this is still going to remain their main launch site. So I believe they're expecting to reach a launch cadence of once every other week, and that will be the milestone that they need to reach before they actually move operations over to KSC. So eventually they'll have both of those locations operational, and probably launch pads in other locations as well too. The more the better, is in order to achieve that launch cadence that they're expecting, for not only refueling missions, but also in the future when they're sending vehicles to Mars. So Starbase should still remain their main launch facility. So yeah, we're gonna have some interesting times coming up here in the future once they get that second pad operational. But when the second pad is operational, we'll probably see them stop operations on the first pad for basically refurbishment, which may include completely demolishing the launch mount, more than likely. They'll probably end up removing the chopsticks and installing a shorter pair, like what we'll see on Pad B. So yeah, they got a ton of work ahead of them. Every time they finish something, they start something else. So it's a never-ending process here at Starbase. And one more thing I did want to just mention here, because I'm not sure if we mentioned it in the stream, but it appears that SpaceX has mentioned that the ship will be entering nose down. So that is going to be pretty aggressive. Interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that, Zach. That'll be hopefully something that we'll be able to get good visuals on as it enters in over the Indian Ocean. We'll see how far out the tracking capabilities of the water or marine assets are that SpaceX has positioned out there, but fingers crossed that the good lighting will provide some good visuals, obviously supported with Starlink, as is the rest of the flight with a ship upper stage. So if things continue as we saw with Flight 5, it should be pretty seamless and fairly uninterrupted, as SpaceX has more than 6,500 Starlinks on orbit now at this point that are currently in operation. Stephen, I'll pose this question to you since we were talking about some of the further down the road capabilities of Starship. This coming from AA5MC with a super chat to LabPadre stream, asking question, will Starship ever be able to achieve a higher orbit without refueling or the assistance of a tug?
That's a really good question. I don't think so, at least under the architecture that SpaceX has publicly commented about so far. To go beyond low Earth orbit will require in-space refueling. So to go to geostationary transfer orbit, to go to the moon, to go to a Lagrange point or Mars, I think all of those require refueling.
Sorry to cut you off here. We're just getting some new renders here being shared by SpaceX in real time of both Starship docking with the Orion capsule you saw here, and now a good rendering of the new Axiom suits as astronauts are coming out of the garage, and a couple of Starships here. Some new graphics that we had not yet seen before, but getting better eyes on what the future of lunar exploration could look like.
Yeah, that's really cool to see. Multiple Starships on the moon, Orion docked with Starship in lunar orbit. That Orion docked with Starship image is what we should see on Artemis 3.
And sorry to have cut you off if you want to continue and finish your point on the higher orbits and the tug question.
No, well, I think I finished it just basically, to sum it up, I think with the architecture SpaceX has publicly discussed, to go beyond low Earth orbit will require some propellant transfer or refueling in LEO.
And of course, that is slightly different, but a similar type of technology is also going to be needed to execute on Blue Origin's human landing system and their cargo lander for the Blue Moon spacecraft once it is ready to start making trips to the moon as well. Currently T-minus 9 minutes, 7 seconds and counting on the countdown. Things will continue to move along pretty continuously from here. The next milestone that we're looking for is the conclusion of ship prop load. That's set to wrap up at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. And at T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds is when booster prop load should wrap up. Joel, throw to you, with those milestones pretty close to on the horizon, what are we going to be seeing visually once we hit those points?
As prop load completes here, we will start to see venting from the ground infrastructure again, from the bottom of the booster quick disconnect and from the tower, as SpaceX works to empty the propellant out of those lines ahead of launch. Yeah, should be significant venting again as we cross that, and get ready for showtime here.
Do you want to go to this video here? SpaceX showing cryo test for Starship Flight 7, which features the first Block 2 version of the ship upper stage. Zach, if you want to jump in with these visuals of some of the key differences here on the ship.
Yeah, so one of the big differences, you can see there's a lot more propellant on version 2 of the ship, so that frost line is going up a lot higher than what we've seen in the past. Also, the position of the PEZ dispenser loader has changed as well too, so that is, I believe, a little bit higher up as well, and that makes the actual payload section a little bit smaller as well too. The Ring Watchers have a really great article that explains all of this stuff. They've been working pretty hard on updating renders for the version 2 of the ship, but yeah, tons of great changes on that, and it's going to be really exciting to see that for the first time on Flight 7.
And the different angles of the forward flaps obviously going to be a big difference as well. We saw those briefly. If you want to, can you just expound on the reasoning for that element of the change and the better protection that could provide for those flaps during peak heating as reentry gets underway?
Yeah, definitely. So those flaps are a little bit more out of the way, so that with their positioning should allow them to hopefully survive better during reentry. I think that's some of the issues that they've been having right now are ones that they're not able to necessarily do anything about. So that is one thing that will make this flight a little bit more interesting, given that we know that they're probably still going to have issues with the forward flaps. What's going to happen when they attempt to do a more aggressive reentry? I think this is, again, probably gathering data for giving them something to compare with once they start with version 2 of the ship. So yeah, that is going to be one of the more exciting features as well. If they end up getting similar results, that's going to be very difficult to address, because they're going to have to make some major changes if that doesn't solve the issue that they've been having.
Just listening here to some of the notes from the SpaceX commentators about the potential for holds or scrubs and how that'll work. Just to reiterate for the audience, if they reach the T-minus 40-second point, they can hold for about 20 minutes. Once the flame deflector is activated about T-minus 10 seconds, though, if for some reason there's an issue that causes them to stop the countdown process, that would be an automatic scrub. Commentators saying that things are still looking go for launch at this point in time. Of course, we'll continue to monitor that as we proceed. Now less than 4 minutes to go before the planned liftoff. You may have seen in the SpaceX graphic at the upper right-hand corner of the screen that the weather, the range, and the health of the vehicle all showing green in support of a liftoff here in the next few minutes. Want to listen to SpaceX's Dan Hewitt for just a quick update here.
So we should be done with our prop load on ship momentarily. Then about 30 seconds later, we'll close out on booster. Our flight control team on board, or in the building just behind me, not on board. Some of them might wish they were on board. Flight control team in the building behind me, they're going to have a lot of work to do right after we lift off, as we still have a lot of manual checks that happen on the tower prior to the flight director, who's going to be Tristan Pierce again today, giving a manual command to bring the booster back to the launch site. And the tower did just incredibly well on the last flight. We didn't lose any of our required redundancy for a catch. So we're hoping to see that again today. A lot of the team, really putting armor on the tower, making all of those things work, played a huge role in making that catch possible, and looking forward to hopefully seeing that happen again. And of course, sending our first payload to space. You can see the banana. It's very tightly secured, but I assure you it does have some room to float around. So once we're in a zero gravity environment, we should see our first Starship zero gravity indicator putting on a little bit of a show. And that's looking right in. That's where we're going to have Starlinks. That's our PEZ deployer. So getting its ride to space. So coming up on about 2.5 minutes, we are closing out on all of our prop load. Just heard that our fill drains are starting to close, so that means we're no longer going to be flowing propellant into the booster and the ship. We're going to do what's called pushbacks. So all of that propellant in the ground systems is going to get pushed back to the tanks, clear out everything around the pad right before we light those 33 engines and take off. Just quick reminder, you're going to see fire start at the bottom. You're going to see the deflector start at about 10 seconds before launch. Lots of water to help dissipate all that heat, all that sound. And then the engine starting up in 3 different groups. And then about a second after T0, we should see liftoff. About 2.5 minutes into the flight, a little bit longer, we'll see hot staging. And that's when we're going to be listening really close on those loops to see if we're going to be bringing the booster back for a catch today. Do always want to caution, it's never a guarantee. We've done this once. We'll see if we do it again. We're only going to do it if the booster and the tower are looking really good before we attempt to bring it back here. But coming up on a minute, not tracking any holds on the board right now. So as long as we don't have any last second things, which do happen. All right, flight director just confirmed T-minus 1 minute.
And again, SpaceX is coming in on a slight delay, which is why you heard that 1 minute. Currently T-minus 30 seconds in real time. $20 seconds. Not holding at the T-minus 40 minute mark per the SpaceX feed. 15 seconds. We're go for launch in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Flame deflector activated. 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And movement. We have liftoff of Starship Flight 6. And the rocket has cleared the tower. And a great ascent of the rocket so far, now coming up on a minute into flight. Starship approaching max Q, the point of peak aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Some great tracking shots by the teams at LabPadre and Spaceflight now. Call for max Q. We're coming upon a few different events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see for the Super Heavy booster Miko, which in this case is most engines cut off, then the hot staging for the stage separation, then the Super Heavy boost back burn will start at about T plus 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Good flights so far, all 33 Raptors on the booster. Continuing a good burn so far. Less than 30 seconds to Miko. SpaceX monitoring to see if they are going to go forward with the catch today. Approaching Miko. And you see Miko there. Hot staging. SpaceX confirms that the tower is go for catch. Ignition on the ship upper stage. And some good on camera or on ship views. Or this is the Super Heavy booster, one of those hypersonic grid fins there. Now nearly 4 minutes into flight. Boost back burn shutdown has occurred. Booster has been sounds like there may be an offshore diversion, which means we are sounds like not going to see SpaceX go for the Super Heavy booster catch. So the Super Heavy booster will be landing in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. They are not going to be attempting a tower catch today. As SpaceX said in the run-up to this mission, this was always a possibility that if all of the commit criteria were not in alignment on both the Super Heavy booster as well as the tower, that they would not go for a catch, and that is what we have here today. We're continuing to track the Super Heavy booster as it makes its descent. That little white dot at the base of the box on the right-hand side of your screen, that is the hot stage ring that was jettisoned. Now T plus 5 minutes, 41 seconds into the count. The landing burn should be starting in less than a minute on the Super Heavy booster. SpaceX will, of course, continue to get good flight data from the Super Heavy booster, even though it is not in a position for them to make a catch attempt today. This tracking view from the perspective of South Padre Island, and this from due west of the launch pad. So we're coming up on the landing burn start. Now landing burn underway. And a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico of the Super Heavy booster B-13. And the booster has exploded on the water. So for those joining once again, SpaceX waved off a catch attempt of the Super Heavy booster, instead opting to have a water splashdown instead. So you can see the ship upper stage still continuing on with its flight, though. Now T plus 7 minutes 41 seconds in real time, 7:29 on the SpaceX feed. The next milestone that we're tracking here is actually an important test that's coming up in just about 30 minutes. Will be the ignition of a Raptor engine. Getting a nice view from multiple perspectives on the ship here. Want to bring in our commentating panel here as we're continuing to watch the ship upper stage. Stephen, I'll start with you. We always knew that waving off of the Super Heavy booster catch was certainly a possibility, but your thoughts on the decision to not go for the catch at this juncture on Flight 6?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what SpaceX, the flight control team, saw in the data that made them decide not to attempt the catch. Everything looked pretty normal to me with the Super Heavy booster on descent. Certainly looked like it reached the ocean intact and at a relatively low rate of speed, low descent rate. So unless it was significantly off course or was a problem with guidance or something, who knows? We'll see. I'm sure we'll find out from Elon or from SpaceX, even perhaps during their broadcast, what caused that issue, and to see them not go for the catch, a little disappointing. Again, not entirely surprising. This is only the second time they've tried it, but it looks like maybe they learned something from the descent that they can adjust or tweak on the next vehicle to make chances of a catch even greater.
Well, and, as we heard from some audio that Elon Musk likely inadvertently published to X, formerly Twitter, with a debrief from Flight 5, it sounded like they got pretty close to having to abort the catch from Flight 5, and that it was, I'll paraphrase and not use the profanity that was used by one of the SpaceX employees, but some pretty scary stuff as it came right down to the wire there. So potentially they were seeing something similar with this, but to your point, Stephen, we'll have to wait to hear from SpaceX and get some more information from the data once they've got a full wrap on this mission.
Yeah, of course, that issue they saw on some great views. I think that's Florida and the Bahamas that we're seeing right now on the view from Starship. Pretty remarkable to see that from space. So anyway, I think the issue that they almost got bitten by on Flight 5 was closer down to the launch tower, and they were close to having to divert the booster off to the south of the launch tower out to the remote dunes just south of the launch site to avoid hitting the tower. Whatever they saw in the data this time was a much higher up, either during or shortly after the boost back burn.
And just one other point of note, calling back a previous part of our conversation in the run-up to launch, do have word that the crew aboard the International Space Station reportedly did see the launch from orbit. So keep your eyes peeled for some social media updates in the hours to come, particularly from NASA astronaut Don Pettit. See if he was able to get some good photography of this mission. Certainly something that he was going to try to capture, and if anyone can, it was going to be Don Pettit now that Matthew Dominic is back here on Earth. Zach, want to bring you into the conversation at this juncture now, T plus 11 minutes, 45 seconds on the SpaceX feed, as we're awaiting the relight of the Raptor engine on, as it continues this suborbital flight. Your thoughts on the mission so far?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of hoping we were going to really get to see that new landing profile for the booster, but obviously, things didn't really pan out for that. It'll be definitely interesting to hear what the reason for that was, but I think it's good to actually see the abort in action. Obviously, it's not one of those things that you would really expect to go wrong as far as just sending a command and having it not do what it was originally going to do. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a learning experience for them. I think it's hopefully something that they can resolve rather easily. I'm sure it probably will be, considering they pulled it off last time. So yeah, definitely going to have to wait and hear more information on that. Kind of still processing things right now myself.
It is quite fresh, and obviously a lot was happening very quickly.
If I may jump in, Will, I think
Please.
one thing to note is another launch with perfect engine performance by all the Raptors.
Yeah, that shouldn't be lost in the disappointment from some on the lack of a booster catch. That was something that was certainly not an easy point to get to when they were first able to launch with all 33 Raptors under full power, and certainly by all accounts they had a flawless liftoff through MECO into the hot staging. So all 33 Raptors seem to perform as intended, at least as far as we know at this stage.
Yeah, well, we obviously don't know what caused the divert maneuver out to the Gulf of Mexico. That could be an engine issue. Wouldn't rule that out. But yeah, from everything, early indications, all the engines were working fine.
As we are awaiting the relight of the Raptor engine coming up in a little more than 20 minutes now, I want to go back to some of the questions that have been posed to continue this conversation here. This question coming in from Jean-Luc to the Spaceflight Now stream. Question, and I'll pose this to Joel. Joel, why are the grid fins out on the Super Heavy booster as opposed to the Falcon 9 grid fins that are not deployed until separation?
I think one of the main reasons is that the philosophy of the best part is no part. It's grid fins are stronger, cheaper if they don't have to rotate out that way. And my understanding is, they have such a low profile during the early stages of flight that they're not a hindrance to the vehicle's performance. So there's just no reason to have that extra mechanism in there.
Yeah, I think to your point, certainly as they want to simplify things, they want do that as much as possible. We're actually taking a look now inside the Starship upper stage. I saw a brief glimpse of what has been sort of the mascot of the mission, if you will, the quote-unquote standard banana that has been part of this flight. It was on the ship upper stage near the serial number S31 with their little 8-bit cartoon banana holding another banana, and now taking a look back inside. Stephen, we don't often get to see the interior of Starship, so use this opportunity as we get periodic peeks inside. Just your thoughts on, actually getting to see this version of Starship's interior, and, how you're sort of thinking about the possibilities coming down the road now that we're getting real glimpses as opposed to renders and PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of the hardware they have inside the payload compartment to accommodate Starlink satellites in the future. Of course, that will use that PEZ door to kind of spit them out one by one, almost like a deck of cards, is the way SpaceX plans to deploy Starlinks from Starship. We have Block 2 coming. Block 2 of the ship is coming down the line next. So I would be curious, actually. We know some of the modifications they're making to the flaps, to the heat shield, and the larger propellant tanks. I would be curious, what changes they might be making to the payload bay door, the PEZ dispenser, or the hardware inside on Block 2. They did open the door, the PEZ door on one of the earlier test flights. It didn't go perfectly, is my understanding. So they're probably iterating on that design, and of course that may be incorporated on Block 2. We'll see.
Yeah, it certainly will be interesting to see the next time that they do a door demo on the Block 2 version of Starship. Now, T plus 17 minutes, 25 seconds into flight, you can see Starship is flying into essentially orbital night here, this being a suborbital mission, but see the sun setting on the other side of the Earth. One of the benefits of launching Starship as late as it did here in Texas is that on the other side of this mission, when it gets ready for splashdown, that of course will be doing so under the light of daytime, or at least the morning time there off the coast of Australia. I'll pose this question to you, Zach. This coming from Treadway Buckles, asking why SpaceX decided to use chopsticks for the booster instead of previous booster landing methods. Obviously, the Falcon 9 uses its landing legs to touch down on a drone ship or back at the landing pads in California and Florida, but it was a very intentional design to use the chopsticks for the Starship program. From what you know about the development and the thinking behind it, you want to go into a little bit of why that decision was made.
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to figuring out what the fastest possible method for reflight is, and placing it back on the launch mount is basically going to be the best option for that. So other than landing literally on the launch mount, this is the next best thing. So it's been a thing that's kind of been debated leading up to that first catch attempt. A lot of people have suggested better ways of doing it. I know I personally get lots of emails of people asking me to cover different possibilities of how this could be done. But overall, I think this is a great design, and it really allows them to move their operations at a rate that you wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. The potential to perform a reflight in the same day is really only possible by using this method. So I think they probably had a list of 10 different ways that they could do it, and this is what they came up with. And I've really been enjoying just the whole process of leading up to this point, and also for the next phase of it, because we'll eventually see them do this with shorter chopsticks. So that will be very interesting. One thing I did want to point out, I'm not sure if we have a camera view of it, but the Lightning Tower on top of the launch tower seems to have been damaged to some degree, so that's leaning a little bit to the side right now. I don't know if that may have something to have played into the decision to abort the landing attempt. They did call out that the tower was go for landing, so it did almost imply that there was something related to the booster and not the ground facilities, but that is one thing to point out.
Yeah, good observation, Zach. So you're taking a look at a wide view of the tower. You can certainly see that lighting protection piece tilting off to the right-hand side from this vantage point. So we're getting another look back inside the interior of the ship upper stage with that aforementioned banana hanging from one of those beams. We're currently T plus 21 minutes, 21 seconds and counting into this flight. We're about 16 minutes away from the Raptor in-space fleet relight demo coming up here shortly. It sounds like NASA astronaut Don Pettit was able to get a picture of the launch. So again, be sure to keep an eye out on his social media and other NASA official social channels. So hopefully we'll be able to get an image of that in the next little bit here. No clear idea of when exactly it might come down. If we are able to get a glimpse of it before we end this broadcast at the end of this mission, we'll be sure to bring that into the stream. Here's one that I'll pose to you, Stephen, as we're continuing to wait for that relight demonstration. This coming from Brian Daniel, and maybe a little tricky since SpaceX financials are not exactly the most widely advertised thing, but Brian asks, assuming full rocket recovery, what is the expected cost of a launch of this scale?
That is a really good question. Elon Musk has suggested, not much more than the cost of reloading the propellant. So the goal is to catch the booster, lower it back on the launch mount, refill it, and stack a Starship on it and go and launch again. So that turnaround time would aspirationally be measured in hours, not days or weeks. And as for the cost, I think single-digit millions is probably something that SpaceX is aiming for. We'll see. I think it will require many, many test flights of Starship, hundreds, to get all these capabilities and turnarounds all ironed out to where it's as efficient as it can be. So that's probably still, several years away at a minimum, but that's the goal.
Certainly an ambitious goal, but if they're known for nothing else, SpaceX is certainly known for setting ambitious targets and hitting them eventually. Currently T plus 24 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. We're closing in on about 10 minutes away from that relight demonstration here. Speaking of ambitious cadence, Stephen, I'll stick with you. Just about 24 hours ago, SpaceX's Vice President of Launch, Kiko Donchev, posted the continued expectations for their Rapid Falcon 9 launch cadence, having hit 3 launches in less than 20 hours. He says, and I quote, 21 launches remain on the manifest in 2024 with 43 days to go. Based off of the breakneck cadence that we're potentially going to see for the rest of 2024, how do you imagine 2025 will stack up for SpaceX? Let's put Starship aside for a second, but just focus on the Falcon family of rockets, obviously the meat and potatoes of the SpaceX launch business right now.
Yeah, that's also a good question, Will. 21 launches in 43 days to close out 2024 seems doable, actually, because Kiko tweeted a few days earlier that they launched 17 launches in 31 days, and you can add a few more to that since then. So, a launch every 2 days seems to be something that they can sustain over a number of weeks or months, and potentially even a year or years down the road. So I would bet a similar number, maybe a few more launches in 2025 than they saw in 2024. Of course, they're going to fall a little short of the goal, I believe, of 144 launches this year, primarily due to their stand downs after the launch failure back in July, as well as a booster landing failure also earlier this year. So they were grounded for a period of time. They could not launch Falcon 9s for several weeks when you combine those two stand downs together. So that did, cost them the chance of reaching 144 missions. So I would bet they'll try to go for 144 or maybe some more next year. I do think that I may be wrong. We'll see what SpaceX says publicly, but I have a hunch that we won't see significantly more Falcon 9 launches next year. Not doubling the launch cadence as we saw in previous years, because I think they're close to what they can do with Falcon 9 and the infrastructure they have at the various launch sites in Florida and California. And also, once Starship is flying at a high cadence, it's going to start launching Starlink satellites. And that's going to take away a lot of the demand signal for Falcon 9.
Yeah, certainly. Starlink has been far and away the most often flown payload for SpaceX and its Falcon 9 rocket. In fact, with the most recent launch of Starlink 9-12, that completed SpaceX's 77th Starlink launch, dedicated Starlink launch, out of the 113 Falcon 9 flights that they've made so far in 2024. So, yeah, to say that it's their bread and butter is certainly an understatement. And it'll be interesting to see, once Starlink does pivot over to Starship, if there will be any need or want to do some refresh of the constellation with the Starlink V2 minis, or if those are going to be entirely phased out. I'm not sure, Stephen, if we have good insight into that business, that part of the business.
I don't know that, Will, on any authority, but, SpaceX likes to operate efficiently, and why build two versions of Starlink if you can combine everything you need into one version, potentially version 3, which flies on Starship. So I do think we're approaching the time, I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I think we're approaching the time where we may see the Falcon 9 launch cadence actually start going down.
Wouldn't that be something? Do you have a question coming in from Jabel Zimmerman? I want to bring this up here on the screen if I can. I'm not sure if it's working. His question is, how high into the orbit will Starship go before it comes back down? As we're taking a look at the telemetry data here on the screen, currently flying at about 178 kilometers in altitude. We'll note that a few minutes ago, expert orbital tracker and professional astronomer Jonathan McDowell did post on X, and I'll quote him here, quote, "Looks like apogee was a bit low, only 190 kilometers instead of 213 kilometers. So I'll throw this out to the panel of you three here. How much should that be read into, and what potential impact could that have on the remaining duration of this flight?
Yeah, this is Steven. I'll chime in. Basically no idea. We'll see in a few minutes if SpaceX is going to be go for the engine relight. If they are going to attempt the engine relight, I think that will be an indication that there have been no major issues, at least on the ship side, on this flight. So we'll see in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're in a time will tell type of operation with that one, but certainly appreciate the question. We're currently T plus 30 minutes, 41 seconds into this flight so far. We're now just a hair under 7 minutes from that relight demonstration getting underway. Again, assuming that they are in a good position to do so.
I wonder, do we know, did SpaceX say that they were expected to hit an apogee at 213, or are we inferring that from the last launch? Because I'm wondering if, because of the relight and the fact that that will impart some small delta V changes, if they didn't shift the orbit slightly to hit the same spot in the Indian Ocean after that relight.
From their pre-launch written statement, I don't believe they stated an apogee so far as that part of the statement. But Steven or Zach, if you want to jump in, if you're aware of any other communication from SpaceX, broadly publicly that you're aware of, or from your reporting of what was expected based off of what Jonathan McDowell was saying.
Yeah, I personally, I'm not really sure. That's not my area of specialty. But yeah, I mean, I think it probably may not be too big of a deal. I mean, maybe it's expected to be lower considering that they're planning the second burn. That may actually get them up to where they're supposed to be. But yeah, I'm not really sure on that. All I could really do is speculate.
Do have a quick update from SpaceX saying that a little more than 30 minutes into the flight that all systems continue to look nominal on this mission. They don't specifically mention the booster relight in that statement, but based off of systems looking nominal, that part of their quote, I'll infer that we're continuing on with the relight demonstration here in just a handful of minutes. So we'll continue to watch for that. We're now T plus 34 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. As we're awaiting the planned relight test, do want to bring you really interesting pictures here. We'll go ahead and bring in this additional shot from the vantage point of South Padre Island. You can still see the Super Heavy booster bobbing there in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. What's left of it, at least. Appears there's a little bit of a flame there near the part that's sticking furthest out of the water. We know that from previous Flight 4, they were able to salvage part of the engine section of the Super Heavy booster. Zach, I'll go to you on this one, given that it appears that we've got most of or a good chunk of the booster intact, and it may be once it's safe to try to salvage it, how important is it to get back as much of the hardware as they're able to?
Well, I think the main thing they probably would care about is just the engines. That seemed to be their focus last time as well. So I'm not sure whether or not their goal would be to recover the entire thing. It'd be quite a task probably to safely bring that in. Yeah, so I think if anything, they may probably try to sink it. I would be surprised to see them actually attempts to recover the full booster.
And let's go ahead and listen to an update from Dan Hewitt with SpaceX real quick.
Indian Ocean. Firing off the engine does change your exact splashdown point a little bit, but we've got this keep out zone across the entire Indian Ocean that we made sure was clear ahead of flight, and we continue to monitor during, but we're going to aim for that and hopefully see this relight test coming on in about a minute. It's just going to be one of these engines, and it uses what's called the header tank, so these small spherical tanks in the very top of Starship up in the nose cone. They don't require nearly as much gas to pressurize as your main tank, so they're really useful for any in-orbit maneuvers, and then for landing burn. So if we make it to a landing burn today, we'll be using them for that as well. So we should be coming up in just about the next minute. Should be under a minute now away from that expected ship burn. And again, we've relit Raptors pretty frequently. We just did it with the landing burn and that boost back burn on the booster, and we've done it on ship landing burns. We just haven't done it in this microgravity environment where your propellant management and a lot of other things are different, as you're not weighed down by the force of Earth's gravity. And just heard the call out for startup. There's some light. There's that Raptor relit. And shut down. All right, there you have it. The first time ever lighting a Raptor while in outer space, other than our ascent burn. So really cool to see that relit. That's a pretty critical capability that we're going to need when we're doing orbital missions in the not too distant future. So check another one off. That was a really cool. That was an objective we really wanted to hit on this one, and so good to see Ship knock that one out in orbit. But for now, we're going to coast for just a little bit longer, and then it'll be time for ship entry. So we'll get the usual light show as we return from hypersonic velocities. We're just starting to do the entry prep for that, so we're going to get the flaps positioned, and then it's going to start taking the brunt of all of that heat as you're coming in from well in excess of 10,000 miles an hour. That's all going to build up a lot of heat as you're encountering an increasing atmosphere, building up that friction. And we're going to see how the tiles fare. We've also got some pretty cool tile experiments that we'll talk about in a little bit. But coming up real soon, ship re-entry, successful relight, and we'll start this entry part soon.
And as we approach minute 40 into this flight, a good update from SpaceX and a demonstration of that relight. One box ticked as they continue on with this Starship Flight 6. So, Stephen, bringing you back here on that point, obviously this is something that both SpaceX and NASA really wanted to see, and you have to imagine they're pretty happy, at least with this point in the mission with that relight. And obviously, they'll go through the data and learn as much as they can about it. But your quick takeaway on, that brief relight demonstration we just saw.
Yeah, everything looked to be nominal as expected with that relight. And even though it was just a couple of seconds, we knew it was going to be very brief. So we saw the velocity change, a slight increase in velocity. So adding some speed and energy to the vehicle. And so everything looks to be nominal. Next up is reentry. I think that relight was a big moment, not to be understated. Even though visually it's not as spectacular as the launch or hot staging or catch. Certainly don't want to minimize any of those. But in order to get to this applications phase that I was talking about earlier, versus experimental flight tests, which we've seen on the first 6 flights of Starship, that burn really needed to go well, and early indications are that the burn did go well.
Certainly appeared to go as well as they were hoping. Now 41 minutes and 14 seconds and counting into this mission. Coming up next at about T plus 47 minutes and 13 seconds is when the main part of the entry gets underway, although we're already starting to see some of the plasma buildup around the ship upper stage, a sight that we're now, I guess, getting a little bit more used to seeing now with this having been performed multiple times on the ship. And unfortunately, we're going to have to say farewell to our friend Joel with LabPadre. But before we go ahead and let you go, Joel, just want to get your thoughts on where the Starship Flight 6 mission has got to at this point, and what you're looking forward to with Flight 7. Obviously, recognizing that still got a little ways to go before this one is done and dusted.
Thanks for having me on. I think this flight has gone well. It's a bummer to not see the booster catch, but like everybody said, it'll be interesting to see what SpaceX says about it. But not the end of the world. We know they can do it. We expect to see it become a regular thing in the near future. Excited that the Raptor relight seemed to go well. I would not be surprised if Flight 7 doesn't have at least some Starlinks on it and an actual orbital launch. And I'm really looking forward to that, and really looking forward to seeing what kind of images we can see of this ship reentry in daylight. It's been very interesting to see this start of reentry here because of the dark sky. It's been we saw that plasma a lot sooner than we saw on previous flights. I think it was over 120 kilometers. We started seeing the pink, which was very neat to see. And yeah, seen it a couple times now, but it's still amazing because of how it's becoming commonplace, even though it's a very new thing in the history of spaceflight, is seeing these kind of things live.
Yeah, certainly.
Once again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're very glad to have you, Joel, and look forward to talking with you again in the future as we have many more flights of Starship to cover coming up, and so we appreciate you being with us today.
All right, thanks. See you guys later.
Take care. T plus 44 minutes, 27 seconds and counting so far into this flight. Nice view of the aft end of the ship upper stage, and now a really great multi-view here from SpaceX as the ship upper stage continues to progress through entry. As we continue to track the reentry of Starship, do have a question coming in from Jabel Zimmerman with a super chat. I'll throw this to Stephen and then Zach if you want to add on to it as well, asking how SpaceX communicates with Starship when it's thousands of miles away and it's time to reenter. As folks can see with the watermark at the top right-hand corner of the screen, obviously There's some Starlink communication happening here, but if you want to expound upon that, Stephen.
Yeah, so it's obviously, as you noted, is connected via the Starlink constellation. So the past couple of reentries, they were able to get video and data throughout the reentry of Starship, and that's quite a difference from typical spacecraft reentries, like even with Dragon or the Soyuz spacecraft, where there's a communications blackout period. The trajectory that the Starship reenters on, it's not quite as steep as those capsules, and also the connectivity provided by Starlink is not disrupted by the plasma sheath around the vehicle as it's coming into the atmosphere. So quite a neat capability to bring down high data rate telemetry and video during and throughout the reentry.
So we're continuing to track the entry of the Starship upper stage. There are some now aerial assets over the Super Heavy booster remnants out in the Gulf of Mexico. We're pushing in pretty far with our camera here, so it's not super crisp, but you can see those two white dots that are above the horizon line appear to be a couple of helicopters that are in the area over what's left of the Super Heavy booster.
And we are now well into the reentry phase. They passed the Von Karman line a couple minutes ago, so about 80 kilometers, a little under 80 kilometers, and descending.
A good note, and as we're just now approaching peak heating here on the ship upper stage. Some great angles here on this flight of the ship upper stage. We'll note there will be another vehicle that will pass the Karman line this week as Blue Origin is planning its suborbital flight with its New Shepard rocket, getting ready to lift off with a 6-person crew coming up this Friday, including a couple of repeat flyers from here in Florida. Want to listen to a quick update from SpaceX's Dan Hewitt?
As it was last flight, where we had a team of ship techs do just an otherworldly task, replacing the entire heat shield, thousands of tiles, installing a backup ablative, and that pretty much set us up to do a pinpoint landing on Flight 5. We did not do that with this one. We have some backup in those really sensitive areas around the flap, but this is an older generation heat shield. And knowing we weren't going to do that, we even went and removed some extra tiles. There are some missing tiles on the nose cone where we're testing some backups. There are some steel-covered tiles in a couple of different spots, and there's also a whole lot more steel of the ship showing. As you guys talked about, we gave it a little bit of a haircut, a couple hundred tiles trimmed off the sides, and that's where we might have catch fittings in the future. But color's starting to come in. So it looks like things are going to start heating up, Kate and Jesse.
Yeah, fun fact, Dan, we actually removed 2,100 heat shield tiles from Starship in order to basically present that necessary receding line, which you kind of can see there in your view. Think back to previous flights. The heat shield line came up further on the vehicle, and just like Dan said, we want to test the vehicle beyond what we think it is capable of carrying based on our simulations and calculations. So once again, to just be super plain, don't be surprised if we see some wackadoodle stuff happen here. We won't be. There are a number of things that we are testing out intentionally to see what the ship can take.
Yeah, exactly. And knowing what those limits are will really help us design the vehicle of the future. Essentially, removing those tiles helps us remove a lot of weight from the vehicle, a lot of things that might potentially need refurbishment in the future. And the goal is to come up with a heat shield pattern or design that we don't have to refurbish. We can just continue to use it over and over again. And that's why we're changing some of those tiles and moving stuff around, removing a lot of those tiles, as Kate has been mentioning.
And some good words from the SpaceX commentators there, just listening in on the latest with this mission now, 51 minutes, 35 seconds and counting into this flight. We're anticipating the flip maneuver to come up at about T plus 1 hour, 4 minutes, 56 seconds. Then the landing burn said to begin about 5 seconds thereafter. So once we hit the 1 hour mark, things will start moving very quickly with the ship upper stage. We'll have to wait and see when SpaceX decides to start bringing in some of their marine assets for visuals, hopefully with a good bit of margin so we can see the full descent as it happens. As we're continuing to watch these views, did mention that the folks on the International Space Station were able to catch a view of the ship, of Starship, as it was making its flight. If we can bring that in here in just a second. Just doing some quick work behind the scenes to hear the call that ship is halfway through peak heating. It's now about 67 kilometers in altitude and descending. If you take a look right here as we bring this image in, the red arrow that's pointing just to the right of that robotic arm, that is the Starship rocket as it's making its ascent from southern Texas. So a little bit small in this view. We are hoping that that NASA astronaut Don Pettit will be able to get some better views, but we do also have some audio from this moment from the astronauts on board the space station to Mission Control Houston. Let's go ahead and listen to that for a second.
In Houston on 2, we just saw Starship launch. Pretty awesome. We're getting pictures.
And Sonny, I know that's pretty awesome. On one of our downlinks, we got a Cronus view, so I can't wait to see your pictures.
On it. We just need to get some computers so we can downlink them to you.
Houston Station on 2 for Starship launch.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, we were able to snap a few pictures of the launch. It looked pretty cool from orbit, and we're downloading them now on SSC7. And they're with a bunch of other CEO pictures of cities at night. So it'll probably take, I'm just looking, it'll probably take another 10 minutes to get them downloaded.
That's awesome, Don, and I'm really glad you guys were up there and able to see it. We're looking forward to seeing the pics. Thanks so much for doing that and letting us know SSC7.
And those communications you were just hearing were a recording from chat between NASA astronaut and current International Space Station commander Sonny Williams, as well as NASA astronaut Don Pettit, relaying the visual that they got on Starship as it was launching down to Mission Control Center in Houston. So, Stephen, we were talking about the potential for that and, whether or not they'd be able to get a good visual given the time of day and the lighting, but it sounds like everything came together for at least that part of the mission for them.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. It's cool to hear Don Pettit radio down to Houston, the subject for the Starship launch. I think that's probably the first time we've heard those words from orbit, at least in a public downlink. Pretty cool.
And I'll throw this to Zach first, but Stephen, you can join in if you've got some comments as well. Just as we're seeing some different lighting conditions with this reentry, wonder what your thoughts are as we're at this point in the reentry process as compared to flights 5 and 4. What you're noticing, what maybe jumping out at you.
Well, everything seems to be pretty stable. Not a lot of like rocking back and forth like we saw on, I believe that was flight 3. So, yeah, everything looks really good. It's pretty cool right now. They're starting to get into, it looks like the daylight, crossing into daylight right now. So, good views of, I think I'm only seeing rear flap views, and I think there's one forward flap view there. So, haven't started to see any burn through yet, which is also a good sign. Yeah, I mean, everything looks surprisingly well, especially with those heat tiles that they had removed from the side. I don't see any like glowing of the actual metal yet. So, yeah, it looks pretty promising right now.
Stephen, did you want to add anything as we're approaching the landing flip here in the next several minutes?
I just can't wait to see what it looks like in daylight. It's going to be really fascinating. We've seen this happen at night a couple of times before, and watching those videos has often been, kind of a challenge to try to figure out what exactly we're seeing in those videos at night. In daylight, I hope and expect it'll be much clearer.
Certainly, we can hope for the best, and fingers crossed that those marine assets are training well on the ship's planned position as it comes in. Getting some cool reflections on the top of the ship. And based off of the SpaceX commentary, they have completed peak heating at this point in entry. Now T plus 58 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. The next milestone coming up here will be the ship passing through the point of being transonic. Does appear, Zach, that we are seeing a little bit of possible burn through in the flap that you're seeing in the middle box on the screen, just at the forward tip there. If I'm seeing that as you're seeing it.
Yeah, definitely looks like it's starting to get pretty hot up there. So, I feel like it came a little earlier in the previous flights, but I could be wrong. I'd have to double check the timing on that. Be nice to see how the other one's looking, but I don't think we're going to get a view of that.
Yeah, it does not appear so, unfortunately. But a great view of the ocean below. one of the additional benefits of seeing this come down in the daylight and getting a nice view of that forward flap where it was still glowing red. Should see some good actuating of the flaps here today with this. Now a little more than an hour into flight, as we're still watching the ship as it prepares for its final re-entry. Also keeping an eye on the remnants of the Super Heavy booster bobbing out in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Still a good bit of it above the water here, which perhaps may not be surprising to some, but is certainly interesting to note. SpaceX commentators note there is no plan right now to recover any part of the ship upper stage, as it seems there may be a plan to try and salvage part of the Super Heavy booster. We'll, of course, keep tabs on that in the hours and days to come.
Finally starting to get some reorientation of the ship now. Wow, that is an incredible view from the flaps.
Yeah, it's really striking the difference between a daylight and a nighttime reentry. Zach, with that vapor that we're seeing here, that the chill of the engines as it's preparing to relight for the landing burn? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, the Raptor chill should be on the side below the flaps, so that actually may be methane from the QD in the front, so that venting is pretty normal. You actually can see the Raptor chill vent just to the left of the flap, so there's a little bit coming from there, then some coming from the QD, and some of the RCS vents on the side of the ship as well too.
And it looks like we're less than a minute away from the landing flip here, so given the visibility that we've got right now, it should be quite spectacular. Hopefully we'll get a view from the water as well. Now 4 kilometers and descending. Call from SpaceX that Starship is still on a good trajectory as that begins to descend through the clouds here. Some great views as we were expecting, getting to level out in the belly flop. Standing by for the landing flip. There's the landing, or the flip. And a great view of the Indian Ocean below.
Wow.
And look at that. first daylight splashdown of a ship upper stage down in the Indian Ocean. And here's the buoy view.
It looks like it may not have exploded this time.
Well, stand by.
Oh, never mind. Wow. Looks like it cracked in half, possibly.
It certainly appears to have split pretty squarely in the middle there, although it's a shame that they pulled away from it. Oh, there we go. Oh. Hopefully we get a shot back of the ship, but as we keep our eyes on that, we do have these live pictures of the Super Heavy booster. And you just can see some type of ship that's making its way out towards the Super Heavy, presumably part of the SpaceX fleet. They have asked folks to stay away from this area of the Gulf of Mexico, so presumably any ship that would be approaching would be approved as part of the launch and landing plan. Let's listen to Dan
version of
Hewitt
ship
for
coming
some
soon.
final words.
So a lot more exciting launches coming up real soon here from Starbase. But I'll send us out this time. We'll see you guys next time.
Well, no real notes of color to add there, but as we begin to close things out from the conclusion of splashdown of the ship upper stage, want to go ahead and bring our panel back in to give us their final thoughts. Zach, will start with you before we go to Stephen. You know, from tip to tail, your thoughts on Starship Flight 6 and, you know, now what you're looking forward to with Flight 7, given where we're at.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's probably a lot of new things that were on this booster compared to the previous version. They're always constantly updating all of these vehicles, so it'll be interesting to find out whether or not you know, something that they had changed ended up not working out, or you know, if it just happened to be something else, potentially even related to like upper atmospheric winds or something like that. So yeah, I'm excited to hear more information about this and hopefully even get some close-up images from these marine assets that are out there right now. And as far as the ship goes, I think whatever they were trying to test for seemed to be about as successful as it could be. Obviously, there was still some burn through on those flaps, but I think with Flight 7, with the new version of the ship, we will probably see a little bit better performance in that regard. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting to see what happens on Flight 7 and in the coming days as we learn more about everything that went well and didn't go so well for them for Flight 6.
Before we go ahead and say goodbye to you, Zach, obviously you're going to be very busy between Flights 6 and 7. Where can folks follow you on social channels and find your work?
Yeah, I go by CSI Starbase on Twitter, so X, sorry. So feel free to follow me there if you haven't already. And CSI Starbase, obviously for the YouTube channel. I think I'll probably have another video, possibly two, coming out in the next few weeks. Like I said, I'm going back to work tomorrow, so a little bit of a delay for the next release, but got a lot more to cover now, so that'll be it'll be worth the wait. I feel like. So yeah. Other than that, obviously on the LabPadre streams whenever we have launches, if I'm available for that, and also on the Starbase weekly live streams with RGV Aerial. So yeah, we feel free to check that out if you haven't done that yet. We usually cover all of the weekly flyovers and kind of analyze everything that's new at Starbase. And right now, it's quite a lot happening each week. So always fun doing those shows as well too. So hopefully we'll get some new viewers over there. But in the meantime, thanks for having me on, and I will go ahead and pass this off.
Appreciate you, Zach. And yeah, for folks watching, be sure to subscribe to CSI Starbase, and we'll look forward to that next investigation video from you. Thanks again for joining us, Zach.
Thank you.
And Stephen Clark over at Ars Technica, Space Reporter. It's been a pleasure, as always, to have you. Before we go to the usual plugs, want to get your final thoughts on Starship Flight 6, likely the last Starship flight that we'll see in 2024. Your impressions here and where SpaceX goes at this juncture now that Block 2 ship upper stage is up to bat next.
Yeah, Will, I think obviously a highly successful test flight, a really remarkable video of the Starship making its controlled splashdown in the Indian Ocean. That was really spectacular to see and promising for future catch attempts with the ship next year. So really cool video. You know, everything except for the catch of the booster appeared to go really perfectly from all indications. And even with the booster itself, as we saw, it made a controlled, intact splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. It looks like it could have potentially even made it back to the launch tower, you know, if SpaceX gave the approval to do so. So I would be interested. I'm kind of waiting for any update or news on why the booster catch was aborted and the divert maneuver was why the booster had to do the divert out to the Gulf of Mexico. Flight 7, you know, when that happens with the Block 2 ship, you know, I think things that I'm wondering, and I don't really have answers to right now, I hope we'll get them from SpaceX or Elon soon, are will there be any Starlinks on Flight 7? Will they go for a full orbital flight on Flight 7, given the apparent success of the Raptor engine relight? So I think that's an open question right now. We certainly don't know the answer to that. I would be interested in hearing what the plans are for Flight 7.
As are we all, and of course we'll have to wait and see both when that takes place, what will be on board, and of course coming into potentially a different landscape as 2025 gets underway as far as the approval timeline from the FAA for Starship Flight 7. Will be very interested to see based off of the performance with this. I suppose it'll depend on how different of a mission plan they have in mind as to how soon they can get back to the launch pad from a federal approval standpoint. But Stephen, thank you as always for taking the time to join with us here. Reporter over at Ars Technica alongside his colleague Eric Berger. Folks want to keep up with your work either on the website or your social channels. Where can folks find you?
Yeah, well, pretty simple. I'm on Twitter or X at Stephen Clark1. That's my handle there. I post links to all my stories and occasional, you know, tidbits or thoughts on there. And all my stories you can find at arstechnica.com.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Stephen, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
And with that, folks, we are going to close things out for today with our joint live coverage between LabPadre and Spaceflight Now. Want to give some big final shout-outs and thank yous to all of the folks who have been supporting us here on both channels. First and foremost, want to thank all of the channel members who are part of either or both the Spaceflight Now and or LabPadre communities. It is with your ongoing support that we are able to do what we do day to day on our channels, but certainly when it comes to big launch coverage like this, y'all are the ones that are really the driving force behind it. So thanks to you for that. Want to thank on the LabPadre side of the coin, of course, the man Lab himself and Lucid, as well as everyone that supports LabPadre and the hard work that they do year-round down in the Rio Grande Valley area, and specifically at Starbase, bringing us some great live 24-hour camera views of all the activities happening down there. Also want to thank our folks here at Spaceflight Now for supporting this mission today, our photographer Adam Bernstein, as well as our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs for making the trek down to Texas. And thanks to our other photographer, Michael Kane, for holding down the fort here with us here in Florida while Adam was on the road. It takes a village to make launches like this happen, and we certainly appreciate everyone for being with us. Thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, thanks to you for wherever you happen to be watching from, whether on the LabPadre side or the Spaceflight Now side of the coin. We do these live launch mission coverage opportunities for you, and we thank you for taking the time and having the interest in being with us for the launch of Starship Flight 6. You can do us all a favor by hitting the like button and subscribing on your way out to the digital door, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Of course, we've got more Falcon 9 flights coming up to cover and plenty of things happening down at Starbase, so all the more reason to subscribe to both Spaceflight Now and LabPadre if you haven't done so already. For all of us here, on behalf of LabPadre and Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. It has been wonderful to be with you all for the duration of this live launch coverage of Starship Flight 6. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and ladies and gents, we will see you next time. And until then, bye-bye.